We have learned how to store information inside variables. However, variables can only store one piece of information, one number, one piece of text. If you want to describe something complex, such as a student who has an age, a country of origin, a first name, a last name, several elective classes, grades, you need more than one variable. So what do? You could use several variables. The downside of doing so is that the values are not related in any way as far as your program is concerned. Alternatively, you can use what is known as an object, a single thing that contains several related quantities. Then you could just say something like student142019.VBA grade to change the VBA grade of the student with index number 142019 and do the similar things for different values. To store these quantities in the object, we use properties. Being French is a property of a person, for instance, in the same way that being red is a property of a car. In the previous example, VBA grade is a property of the object student. So now we have one student and we can easily access all properties of the student. However, we cannot access all students at once. What we need is the concept of collection, a set of similar objects. You can use loops on collections, which let you iterate on all their elements easily and perform actions on all or some of them. Finally, an object can, in addition, have what is known as a method. If a property is equivalent to a variable, a method is equivalent to a function. They do something to objects, which is why they are generally named after verbs. Methods are tailored to their objects, and therefore tend to rely on their properties in addition to the arguments they take. For instance, you could have a method called pass, which will alter several properties of our student object to reflect that they went up one school year. So that's how objects work. What's the point? Well, most things in Excel are objects, as far as VBA is concerned. A cell is an object with several properties, its row, its column, its colors. A range is an object, a worksheet is an object, a workbook is an object. Furthermore, some of these objects are or contain collections. A workbook contains the collection of all its worksheets, a worksheet contains the collection of all its cells, a range contains the collections of its cells. Learning about these objects and how they relate to each other is paramount to working on more than one worksheet or workbook. Furthermore, knowing about the way Excel is manipulated by VBA allows you to write shorter and easier code. Finally, the object model is part of most programming languages, and so knowing about it is definitely a transversal skill. Note that VBA allows you to create your own objects, but we will stick to the pre-existing objects as you are unlikely to need that. Since VBA objects belong to objects that are higher in the hierarchy, the proper way to refer to a cell would be by stating which worksheet and workbook it belongs to. As you can recall, we never had to do that before. This is because by default, referring to a cell is understood by VBA to mean the cell that belongs to the active worksheet in the active workbook. Active means the one that is currently visible or closest to being visible. For a cell, it means the cell you last clicked on. Since collections contain many different objects, you need to refer to one element of a collection. This can be done with names or numbers. We call these numbers index. For example, you can refer to the worksheet number 2 or the worksheet called January. Note that if you refer to a workbook by name, the name must include the file extension, so typically .xlsx or .xlsm. One of the best features of collections is the ability to use a different kind of loop on them, the for each loop. For each lets you automatically go through all elements of a collection. So, all worksheets in a workbook, all cells in a range. It works differently from while. Instead of using a counter, you'll use a control element, which is going to become each element in the collection, one different element per iteration. In this example, we use a for each loop to display the names and index numbers of all worksheets in the workbook by using the .name and .index properties of our control element. To use a for each loop, you have to make sure that the control element is of the right type. That is to say, you cannot loop over all cells in the collection of worksheets. The element must be a singular object, a cell, a worksheet, a workbook, and the collection must be a collection. All cells, all worksheets, all workbooks. You should now complete basic exercise 1. Properties in VBA are written by putting a period between the object's name and the property. We have been doing that since session 1 to change the cell's color. A very useful property is called .end. It takes an argument, which is uncommon for a property. That argument can be either accel up, accel down, accel to left, and accel to right. You use this property to move all the way across a range, much like you would with the Ctrl+Arrow shortcut in Excel. You can notably use it to easily find the last cell in a column that contains data by moving up from the end of the worksheet until you find a filled cell. You should now complete basic exercise 2. Similarly, the .offset property also accesses a different cell that depends on the cell it was used on. .offset adds values to the coordinates of a cell. This is useless if you already have the coordinates of the cell, since you could just have written row counter +1 instead of row counter, for instance, but it shines when you do not have the coordinates, like in a for each loop or in combination with .end. The .currentRegime property returns the range that a cell belongs to. This is fairly convenient, but rarely essential. The .row and .column properties return the row or column of the range they are applied to. If you use them on a range that contains more than one cell, they will return the first row or column the range belongs to instead. The .name and .index properties return the name or index number of a worksheet. They also work on workbooks. You can use them to rename worksheets and workbooks. The .count property returns the number of elements in a collection. You can use it to get the number of worksheets in a workbook, or the number of workbooks that are open, or the number of cells in a range. You should now complete PARSON problem 1. Finally, methods. You use methods just like properties. The key difference is that when properties are something about the object, methods do something with or to the object. The range.sort method sorts a range, that is, something done to the range object. You use sort by stating a key, a cell that belongs to the column that contains the data by which you want to sort, and an order, either accel ascending or accel descending. You use .delete on a row, a column, a worksheet, on a workbook by stating its index number or name. Otherwise, you are attempting to delete the entire collection. The range.cut and range.copy methods work very similarly. They cut or copy the contents of a range to the clipboard. There also is a method called paste that would paste the contents of the clipboard, but it is not very useful because you can use the optional argument destination to automatically paste the things you just cut. That is to say, with these examples, we are, in the same line of code, cutting a cell and pasting it elsewhere. Something to be very careful of is that you cannot copy or cut from a worksheet that is not the active worksheet. You have to use the .activate method beforehand to make sure that it is the active worksheet. Finally, the .add method adds a worksheet to the workbook. You can specify arguments to make sure it goes in the right place, but that's rarely critical. You'll typically want to use ActiveSheet.NAME equals something afterwards to rename it.